Hello everyone, my name is Joel Ashton and I'm a wildlife garden designer and installer, and I've been doing this for the last 17 plus years, and I'm very privileged, I feel, to have been asked by Hedgehog Street to make this video for you about all the ways in which you can help wildlife in your own garden, and in particular, of course, the whole reason we are here, our wonderful little mammals, the hedgehogs. So hopefully in this video I'll be able to give you a few top tips as to how you can help our little hogs, and obviously a big shout out to Hedgehog Street. It's a wonderful partnership obviously between the PTES and the Hedgehog Society, so a great joint venture to obviously help raise awareness of our wonderful, sadly declining mammals that we love so much throughout the UK. So in this video, as I say, I'm going to be giving you a few tips and ideas as to how you can help hedgehogs and of course other wildlife as well. I think by doing or installing some of the practices that I'm about to talk to you about, and by practicing some of them in turn, you are therefore going to create an entire ecosystem in your back garden that will not only support hedgehogs but many other walks of life. So without further ado, let's look at the first way you can help. So my first piece of advice to you is to make access for your hedgehogs. Now, I know this might sound ridiculously obvious, but of course if we have fences that go tight to our ground levels, and we have concrete gravel boards, for example, underneath that, as is the way of many fences these days, then of course our hedgehogs are gradually losing the areas that they can access to feed and obviously survive and nest, of course. So by making access for them, you are enabling them to enter your garden and of course access a lot more food. Now, hedgehogs can travel up to 1 mile a night, so they need a lot of gardens to access for food and just to sustain their lifestyle basically. So the more you can give them access to your garden and others, the better. So if you've got 3 adjoining neighbours, for example, one on the right, one behind you, one to your left, then speak to your neighbours and see if you can create a hedgehog highway, which is of course a great way to let these animals access the various gardens that are in your neighbourhood. Now, to do this, you're going to need a hole about 13 centimetres by 13 centimetres, or about just over 5 inches in old money. And of course, if you want to see the full extent of how you can achieve this, then do check out my YouTube channel, Wild Your Garden with Joel Ashton. I have got a full instructional video on the channel as to how you can make one of these in your own fence, gravel board or whatever. So yes, that's the first thing you can do, is make access. And of course, if you are thinking of replacing a fence, these panels are fairly recent, but of course if you have got an existing fence that is a bit dilapidated, then please consider putting in a new hedge, a new native hedge, because not only will this allow more access for hedgehogs to come in and out of the garden, obviously it's a bit difficult if you've got dogs, but you can still put a little bit of stock mesh up or something just to keep them out while the hedge is establishing. But of course by doing this, you're not only allowing access for those hedgehogs, but you're also creating a very nice corridor for them to rummage along for food. Of course, the underneath of a hedge is an ideal corridor for them to move from garden to garden, and of course provide a lot of leaf litter and therefore food in amongst those leaves when they drop. So native hedgerows, if you can get some planted in your garden, they're absolutely wonderful, but first and foremost, make sure they can enter your garden. So now that the hedgehogs have found your wonderful new garden, they will of course be looking for something to eat and obviously a drink to go with it. So the best thing you can do, particularly in the summer months, is provide them with a fresh supply of water on a daily basis, because with the loss of over 1 million ponds throughout our countryside over the last century, we have lost an alarming amount of habitat and open water for these mammals to drink from. So of course when it gets to the summertime, they might be struggling for something to drink. So the best thing you can do, get yourself an old plant pot. I'm pretty sure we can all run to one of these, or an old tray. This is a tray from a plant pot obviously, and just get, you don't have to use a watering can like this obviously, simply fill it up. And not only the hedgehogs, but of course the birds will, I'm sure, appreciate it as well. Like an episode of Blue Peter this. Yes, so the best thing you can do is something as simple as that. Obviously not too deep, because you don't want them climbing over the edge and falling in, and then of course getting stuck and not being able to get out. So a nice shallow plant tray. Make sure you keep it, or an old dish or bowl from the kitchen of course, but make sure you keep it clean just to make sure they've got a fresh supply of water. So fresh water, that's certainly a good thing you can do. Now, as garden lovers in the UK, we are of course obsessed with cleanliness and keeping our herbaceous borders absolutely blooming as long as possible. And one of the ways in which we do this is of course to remove slugs and snails from our borders. Well, I personally don't, but I know a lot of traditional gardeners probably will. And I'm afraid to say that the use of slug pellets to prevent these animals from accessing our borders and enjoying the nice plants we put on display for them means that unfortunately by the mollusks, the snails and the slugs consuming these slug pellets, they can of course have a very adverse effect and lead to the death of many hedgehogs around the country. So the next tip for you is, please, if you are doing so, please stop from using any form of slug pellets in your garden, because they really can have an adverse effect. And it's not only that, it's if the slugs and snails eat them, of course it's one of the main reasons, well, certainly a very big contribution as to why things such as our song thrushes have declined as well, because it moves up the food chain. So even though it's a snail or slug that's eaten that pellet, once the birds or the hedgehogs come to eat those slugs and snails once they've died, it can then of course have an adverse effect later on. And then even further up the food chain, things such as sparrowhawks of course, which will frequent our gardens and take songbirds of course from our feeders. And of course if there's a nice plump song thrush on the lawn, they're not going to say no to it. So please stop using pellets in your garden if you're not doing so already. And of course if you know people that are, please pass on this message to them also. So when these hedgehogs access your garden, now that they can, they of course will want something to eat. So the best thing to do is provide them with a natural source of food that they would find in the wider countryside. Now hedgehogs are particularly omnivorous, they will eat almost anything, but of course they will like to eat a lot of insects, which is the majority of their diet, insects and worms. And part of that obviously is created from having herbaceous borders, from having detritus in our garden, things like leaf piles, log piles and that sort of thing. So by having these habitats, you're going to encourage things such as our centipedes, millipedes, woodlice, spiders, all sorts of creatures, caterpillars that are going to exist within your garden because of this habitat you've created. So by providing the insects with the habitat that they need, they'll move into the garden, and of course there'll be more food to sustain the hedgehogs. They will of course eat slugs and snails as well, which is what we would perceive to be their main diet, but actually it is more along the kind of invertebrate lines, so more insects and a lot of worms as well. So having a bit of mown lawn as well is good, because quite often if you've ever been outside in the evening with a torch and crept very quietly onto your lawn, you can often see worms coming out of holes and mating, and of course a lot of worms will come out of the burrows at night, and that is of course an opportune time for the hedgehogs to find this wonderful tasty treat. So having some mown lawn, having some herbaceous borders to attract insects, to attract the earthworms to come up to the surface, is of course a very good way of providing a natural food source for our hedgehogs. So we've already looked at the importance of not using pellets in your garden, slug pellets in particular, and the obvious reasons for not doing that. And we've also looked at the importance of lawns for providing a habitat for worms to mate on and also come out of, and therefore provide food for our hedgehogs. But I'd like to talk to you now for a second about the importance of not using herbicides. Now, for some reason, for whatever that may be, I cannot quite fathom, we are obsessed with eradicating every other species of plant in our lawns. It seems not all of us, again, I'm not generalising, but a lot of us seem to be obsessed with spraying our lawns and making them basically free of wildflowers. And this lawn behind me here is currently full, it's difficult to see, but it's currently full of daisies, hoary plantain, bird's foot trefoil, red clover, self-heal, many species of wildflower that have occurred naturally over the years. And because it's never been treated with any herbicides, it has of course meant that it can create a wonderful little micro habitat in itself. And by leaving the grass to grow, even if you just raise your mower height to 2 or 3 inches, that will enable all of these wildflowers to flower, which is therefore providing lots more nectar and pollen for many insects, and of course larval food plants for a lot of other moths, butterflies and everything else, and in turn more food for the hedgehogs. So by simply not mowing your lawn as often or cutting it as low as you usually do by lifting the height, and by not using herbicides on your lawn, you can in fact make a really big difference in terms of the habitat in your own garden by not doing anything at all. So it really is as simple as not mowing and not using herbicides. So when it gets to autumn time and hedgehogs think about going into hibernation, there are a couple of things you can consider doing to help them. One is of course providing a lot of nesting material for them, and this is of course usually deciduous leaves which they like to line their hibernaculums with. So leaves from things such as native trees like silver birch and just native foliage in general, but of course deciduous foliage is more important than evergreen foliage. So things like holly and laurel, things like that, of course is not going to be as comfortable for them. So by having deciduous trees and shrubs in your garden, it is obviously providing a good source of bedding material for them, and we'll have a look at the other way in which you can help them now. So once you've supplied your hedgehogs with everything they need to make their hibernaculum for the winter, of course they need somewhere to do it, and by providing more branches and sticks and twigs and logs and making piles of them in your garden in some nice sheltered spots in the corner of the garden, and things like ivy obviously make a really good habitat for them, especially if there's kind of logs covered over it. If the logs are covered over with the ivy, then of course it makes a really good habitat for the hedgehogs to get inside and stay warm through the winter months. So my main message for this point is not to be too tidy. Leave piles of brash around your garden, leave log stacks and make some specific ones for them, nice decent sized stacks so they can get inside of and keep warm through the winter months. Well, I hope this video has given you some hints and tips as to how you can help wildlife, and in particular our wonderful little hedgehogs in your own garden. And please, as a final message, do continue to support Hedgehog Street in their wonderful cause of raising conservation awareness about our wonderful little hedgehogs and how you can help them. So please spread this message as far and wide as possible. They really do need all the help they can get these days. And thank you very much for watching. I do hope this has inspired you to go and do your bit for wildlife in your own garden. Thanks very much.